$30 bought a winter's worth of grain or a decent saddle. It was never supposed to buy a woman's silence. Verity didn't cry when Burton Alcott handed her over. She had learned years ago that crying only made men feel powerful, and she refused to give Alcott that. She stood in the middle of Garnet Creek's only saloon on a Thursday night in November of 1883, her wrists bound loosely in front of her with a length of hemp rope, and she counted the knotholes in the ceiling. 14. She had been counting them for the better part of an hour. The saloon smelled of rancid tallow candles and unwashed ambition. Men crowded 3 deep at the bar, their voices rising and falling in a tide of grievance and bluster. Outside, the first real snow of the season had arrived without apology, packing itself against the window glass in thick, wet slabs. Nobody was riding anywhere tonight. Nobody except the man who had just walked in from the cold. He wasn't tall in the theatrical way of men who wanted you to notice their height. He was simply large in the way that certain old oaks were large, settled, dense, taking up exactly the space he occupied without apology or theater. His coat was dark canvas waxed against the rain, and he wore it open despite the cold, the way a man wears a coat when he's used to working in it. He had the kind of face that had been weathered past the point where age mattered anymore, somewhere between 40 and the earth itself. He set a canvas sack on the bar and ordered coffee in a voice low enough that the bartender had to lean in to hear it. Verity watched him the way she watched all men now, cataloguing, calculating. Alcott's voice cut through the noise like a dull saw through green wood. $30. Good worker, strong back, already knows how to keep her mouth shut. He yanked a rope, and Verity stumbled 2 steps forward. She caught herself, planting her feet on the sticky floorboards, and fixed her eyes on a point just past the heads of the men watching her. She felt them looking. She had learned not to feel it anymore, or to feel it in a different register. The way you eventually stopped flinching had a sound you heard every day. It became weather. Unpleasant, unavoidable, irrelevant to survival. The man at the bar didn't turn around right away. Verity noticed that. Most men turned immediately. Curiosity or appetite or moral outrage, it didn't matter which, they all turned. This one took another slow sip of his coffee and set the tin mug down with a deliberate click before he moved. He turned and looked at the room with dark, unhurried eyes. He looked at Alcott. He looked at the rope. His gaze moved to Verity last, and when it reached her it didn't linger the way the others did. It was a quick, assessing look, the kind a doctor gives a wound before he decides what to do about it. Then he looked away. Verity's stomach dropped in a way she didn't fully understand. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. $30, he said, still facing the bar. His voice carried without effort, the way a stone carries across still water. Paid to the man with the rope. The room went strange and quiet. Alcott made a sound between a laugh and a cough. "You don't even want to look at the merchandise first?" The man set 3 folded bills on the bar. He picked up his coffee mug. He finally turned, fully this time, and looked directly at Alcott. "I want you to let go of the rope and pick up the money before I change my mind." Something in his voice made Alcott comply. The bills disappeared into Alcott's coat with the speed of a man who knows not to question luck. The rope went slack. Verity stood holding the loose end of it, not quite sure what to do with her hands. The man walked to her. He stopped an arm's length away. Up close, she could see a scar along the left side of his jaw, fine and old, and a pair of eyes that were a tired, complicated gray. "Jeb Farrow," he said. She stared at him. "That's my name," he said, "in case you were wondering." She hadn't been. Specifically, she had been wondering whether he was the kind of man who hit before or after he told you what he wanted. She had been wondering whether she could make it to the back door of the saloon before anyone caught her. She had been measuring angles and distances with the part of her brain that never fully rested anymore. "Verity," she said. He nodded once, as if that settled something. He reached out and took the end of the rope from her hands. Then he walked to the bar, borrowed the bartender's skinning knife, and cut the rope off her wrists. He handed the knife back, pulled on his gloves, and picked up his canvas sack. "I have a horse outside," he said. "It's cold. We should go." That was all. No speech, no explanation, no promise. Verity followed him because the alternatives were Alcott and the snow, and she was, at the core of everything, a practical woman. His horse was a gray mare of advanced years and considerable dignity, tied under the overhang of the feed store next door. Jeb loaded his sack into one saddlebag and helped Verity mount without ceremony, then swung up behind her and pulled a heavy wool blanket from the other saddlebag, wrapping it around her shoulders with the efficiency of someone performing a familiar task. She sat rigid inside the warmth of it. They rode north out of Garnet Creek, into the dark throat of the pines. He didn't explain where they were going. She didn't ask. Asking questions, she had learned, was a kind of currency you spent carefully. Save them for when the answers mattered. The cabin appeared out of the snowfall like something that had always been there. A low, solid structure tucked against a granite outcropping, with a covered woodpile on one side and a small lean-to stable on the other. Smoke had not been burning. The place was cold and dark and smelled of sawdust and dried herbs when he pushed the door open. He moved through the darkness with the ease of long habit, striking a match, touching it to a prepared twist of paper in the hearth. The fire took slowly. In the growing orange light, Verity stood just inside the doorway and assessed the room. Single room. One bed in the far corner. A real one. A rope frame, with a corn-husk mattress, not a pallet on the floor. A table and 2 chairs. A cast-iron stove. Shelves of provisions, neatly ordered. Hooks by the door with coats and tools. A rifle above the mantel. A Remington pistol in a holster hung over the back of one of the chairs. She noted the pistol. Jed moved to the stove, filled a pot from a water barrel, set it to heat. He pulled a cloth sack from a shelf and began measuring out dried beans. He did not look at her. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. She sat at the table. Her feet hurt. The cold had been inside her boots for the last hour of riding, and now that she was near warmth, the pain in her toes was announcing itself with sudden urgency. She curled her hands in her lap and said nothing. He set a bowl of hard biscuits on the table. He poured water from a pitcher, set the cup beside the bowl, and returned to the stove without comment. Verity looked at the biscuits. She looked at the cup of water. She looked at him. He had his back to her, stirring the beans. His shoulders were level and unhurried. He was not watching her from the corner of his eye the way men watched when they were waiting for something. He was simply cooking. She ate 3 biscuits before she even recognized she was doing it. She drank the water in one long, continuous swallow and felt the cold of it hit the hollow center of her chest. When the beans were done, he ladled 2 bowls and sat across from her. He ate without speaking. She ate without speaking. She ate without speaking. The fire worked itself into a real heat behind them. When the bowls were empty, he stood and carried them to the dry sink. He came back to the table and stood for a moment looking at something past her shoulder, not at her, but in the approximate direction of the bed. Verity's hand stilled in her lap. She knew what came next. She had learned to read the pause before it, the specific quality of male silence that preceded a particular kind of demand. She had learned to make herself go somewhere else in her mind during it, to leave her body to manage what needed managing and return when it was over. She pushed back her chair and stood up. Jeb looked at her. She met his eyes, gray, tired, difficult, and asked in a voice that came out very steady and very quiet, "Do you want me in the bed now, or after you're asleep?" The words arranged themselves in the air between them. Jeb went completely still. "I don't take up much space," she continued, because she had learned that providing practical information made men feel better about what they were doing, and men who felt better about it were generally less rough. "And I don't make noise. I just need to know if there are She paused, calculated, continued. Particular things you want, so I can be prepared. It's easier if I know beforehand. Jeb set down the cup he had been holding. He set it down very carefully, like a man setting down something fragile. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a long moment, looking out at the black and white of the snowfall. "Verity," he said finally. "Yes." "Who taught you to talk like that?" It was not quite a question. She said nothing, because the answer was every man who had ever owned a piece of her time, and she didn't think listing them would be useful. Jeb turned around. His face was doing something complicated and controlled. He gestured at the bed in the corner. "You sleep there," he said. "I sleep by the fire." She looked at him. "You're not—" she began. "No." "Then what do you—" "Nothing." His voice was level. "I want nothing. You can bar the door from the inside if you want. There's an iron bracket and a bar beside it. Use it if it helps you sleep." Verity stood in the middle of the room and felt something dangerous move through her chest, something she had not felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. It felt like the first crack in ice after a long winter. She didn't trust it. She recognized it as a feeling that could get her hurt if she followed it to its conclusion. She looked at the door. She looked at the iron bar leaning beside it. Then she looked at Jeb, who had already spread his bedroll on the floor in front of the hearth and was tugging off his boots with his back to her. She did not bar the door that night. She lay on the corn husk mattress in the dark and listened to him breathe, slow and even, already asleep within minutes. And she stared at the ceiling and thought about the $30. She thought about what it was supposed to mean and what it actually seemed to mean, and she decided, in the practical center of herself, that she would figure it out in the morning, because whatever it meant, tonight she was warm, and that was enough. Morning arrived gray and merciless, the snow still coming down outside the one small window. Verity woke before dawn, as she always did. Old habit. The early morning was safer. You saw what was coming. Jeb was already up. He was at the dry sink, washing his face from a basin of cold water. He had his shirt on but untucked, and she could see where a long-healed burn scar crossed the back of his left forearm. He didn't notice she was awake. She got up before he turned around, because she had spent enough mornings lying still, while someone else moved through a room to know that she preferred to be standing. "Coffee?" she asked. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Something brief moved across his face. "If you want to make it." She found the coffee in a tin on the second shelf. She found the grinder. She worked in silence, and he moved around her in silence, and the fire slowly became a real fire, and the cold retreated to the corners of the room. When the coffee was done, she poured 2 cups and set his on the table without looking at him. He sat. She sat. They drank. "I'll need to know what work you want done," she said when the cup was half empty. "What work you're capable of," he said. "Not what you think you owe me." She looked at him. "There's a difference," he said. She considered that for a long time. "I can cook well enough. I can mend. I know how to dress a deer if you bring it back whole. I grew up on a farm before." She stopped. She started again. "I know how to work." Jeb nodded. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I trap line runs 4 miles north and east. I'm gone most mornings. I'll be back by midday. While I'm out, the cabin is yours." She waited for the rest of it. There was no rest of it. "Yours," she repeated, testing the word. "Mine when I'm in it," he said. "Yours when I'm not." He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration, as if the words were simply information being conveyed from one place to another. Verity looked at the table. She looked at the window, at the snow outside. She said, "Alcott will come back. Probably. He'll say you only paid $30. He'll say it wasn't enough." "He'll be wrong," Jeb said. "And he'll know I know that." He stood, took his coat from the hook. "There's venison in the cold box outside if you want to use it for stew. The potatoes are in the crate under the table." He pulled on his hat. "Bar the door while I'm out. Not because of me, just because." He left. Verity sat alone in the cabin for a long time before she moved. Then she got up, found the potatoes, found the venison, and made the best stew she could with what was there. It was something to do with her hands. Her hands needed something to do. December came, then the real cold. The trap line produced well, beaver and fox mostly, and occasional mink. Jeb worked the pelts in the evenings, and Verity mended the traps that needed mending, learning the work from watching him and then from doing it beside him. He didn't compliment her work. He also didn't correct it unless she asked, and when she asked, he told her plainly what she'd done wrong and showed her the right way without making it a lesson about her inadequacy. She found this remarkable. She found a lot of things about him remarkable. In the quiet way she found things remarkable now. Internally, with no expression on her face, cataloging them in a private place she kept for things she wasn't yet sure she trusted. He gave her his extra pair of wool socks without comment after he noticed her limping on cold mornings. He left a book on the table, a battered copy of something by Washington Irving, with no explanation and no instruction to read it. Just left it there the way you left water out for an animal you weren't sure would take it from your hand yet. She read it twice. She started leaving the fire banked higher when she went to bed, because she noticed that he slept cold on the floor and wouldn't say so. Neither of them mentioned these things. There was one night in December when she woke from a nightmare, the kind that didn't have a clear image, just a feeling, a weight, a specific quality of helplessness. And she was sitting up in the dark before she was fully awake, her heart going fast and stupid in her chest. Across the room she could see the low orange glow of the banked fire. In Jeb's voice, very quiet in the dark, "You're all right." Not a question, not an instruction, just information. She lay back down. She did not sleep again for an hour, but the hour was quieter than it would have been. January turned the mountain into a closed fist. The snow was so deep that the lower windows were half buried, and going outside for wood was an expedition that required both of them. They developed a wordless system. She held the door, he carried the load, she banked the snow back from the threshold while he stacked. Back inside he shook off his coat and she handed him the coffee that was waiting. It was a small life. It fit around them like something that had been made for two people of exactly their particular dimensions. She was aware of the danger of that. She was aware that warmth could be a kind of trap, that comfort was the oldest way to make someone lower their guard, that she had been here before in smaller versions. A decent meal, a gentle word, and then the thing underneath it revealing itself. She had promised herself after the last time that she would not let herself be fooled again by the interval between the kindness and the cost. She watched for it every day. She did not find it. What she found instead was a man who went outside in the dark of a January night, when the temperature dropped past bearing, not to check the traps, but because the gray mare was restless and he'd heard her, and wanted her to know someone was there. She found a man who ate whatever she cooked without opinion and cleaned his own dishes without being asked. She found a man who, when she accidentally knocked a shelf of provisions loose and half his winter coffee supply hit the floor in a spray of brown powder, simply looked at the mess and said, "Well, we'll drink less coffee," and got the broom. She was not foolish enough to call this love. She was not yet capable of calling it anything. But she felt something shifting in the architecture of herself, the way weight shifts in a building that's been reinforced, not weaker, but differently arranged. She was thinking about this on a Monday afternoon in late January, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, when the gray mare screamed. Verity was on her feet before she finished the thought. Through the frost-hazed window, she saw them, two riders coming up through the tree line, one on a broad-chested bay horse she recognized. Alcott's horse, and beside him, a man she didn't know on a painted pony, with a rifle balanced easy across his saddle like a man who was accustomed to carrying it at the ready. Jeb was at the far end of the trap line. She knew exactly where that was. She knew he couldn't hear anything from there. Verity stood in the middle of the cabin. Her eyes went to the Remington on the hook by the door. She knew how to shoot. Her father had made certain of that, the only genuinely useful thing he had ever given her. She hadn't held a gun in 2 years. She took it down from the hook. She checked the cylinder, loaded all 6 chambers, and set it on the table beside the door where she could reach it. Then she opened the door and stepped out onto the narrow porch. Alcott brought his horse up short when he saw her standing there. Then he smiled, and the smile was the particular smile of a man who had done a calculation and liked the answer he'd gotten. "Well now," he said, "alone up here, are we?" "I'm not interested in a conversation, Mr. Alcott." "That's all right. I'm not much for talking either." He swung down from the horse. "I've been thinking about that $30. Seems to me Pharaoh got a good deal on something that was worth considerably more." "You took the money." "I did. And now I'm thinking about taking back the merchandise." He started toward the porch. His companion stayed on the horse, the rifle still balanced lazy across the saddle. "Pharaoh's not here to make this complicated." "He's not," Verity agreed. She stepped back through the doorway and picked up the Remington. She stepped back out onto the porch. Alcott stopped. She didn't point it at him. She held it at her side, her arm loose, her finger not yet on the trigger. She wanted him to do the math first. She wanted him to understand that the math worked. "I was born on a farm in Harlan County," she said in a conversational voice. "My father raised hogs. I have been shooting since I was 9 years old, Mr. Alcott. I shot my first deer at 11 and my first snake at 6. I am not a good shot, meaning I am not a fancy shot. I don't shoot for distance or for show. I shoot for stops, and I stop what I aim at." Alcott looked at the pistol. He looked at her face. "The gentleman on the painted horse," she continued, "should also know that I can see him adjusting his grip on that rifle, and I want him to know that I'm not going to hesitate. I've spent a long time hesitating. I'm done with it." 30 seconds of silence. The man on the painted pony let the rifle settle back to its resting position. Alcott took a step backward. "This isn't finished," he said. "It is," said Verity. "Ride down the mountain, Mr. Alcott." They rode. She stood on the porch until they were through the tree line, and the sound of hoofbeats was gone. Then she stood a while longer, because her legs were not entirely reliable. Then she went inside and sat on the floor next to the stove and put the Remington down on the boards beside her and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and breathed. She was still sitting there when she heard Jeb's boots on the porch. He came in, took in the scene, her on the floor, the pistol, the door still standing open, and he did not say anything dramatic. He closed the door. He pulled off his gloves. He crouched down in front of her the way a man crouches in front of a fire. He's trying to coax, carefully, without rushing it. "Alcott," she said. "I know. I saw them on the trail going down." He paused. "Are you hurt?" "No." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out slowly and picked up the Remington. He checked the cylinder, still loaded, none fired, and hung it back on the hook by the door. He came back and sat on the floor beside her. "Not close, just present." "They won't come back," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "But I know Alcott. He's not brave. He's just hungry. We gave him nothing, and he'll find somewhere easier." Verity leaned her head back against the stove's warm flank. The iron was warm through her hair. "He called me merchandise," she said. Her voice came out flat and informational. "I know what he called you. I want to say it doesn't matter." She paused. "It does still matter. I thought it wouldn't, after long enough." Jeb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think it's supposed to matter. I think people who say things like that don't deserve to be let off the hook just because time passes. She looked at him. His profile in the low light of the stove was very still. "I'll be all right," she said. "I know you will," he said. There was no flatness in it. He meant it as a fact. February softened, degree by slow degree, the way February does in the mountains. Not warmly, not generously, but with a grudging loosening, as if winter were slowly unclenching one finger at a time. She had been in the cabin for 3 months. She had stopped waking up listening for the quality of a man's footsteps. She had stopped calculating angles of escape from every room. She hadn't stopped entirely. She didn't think she would ever stop entirely. But the calculations were quieter now, more background than foreground, the way old fears become when they've been given enough uneventful days to absorb. One evening in early February, she was sitting in the chair by the fire, mending the knee of a pair of Jeb's work trousers, when he came in from the stable and stopped just inside the door. He stood there long enough that she looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the assessing look. Not the careful, controlled look he used when he was managing his reactions. Something quieter than both of those, and less defended. "What?" she said. He crossed to the table and sat down. He folded his hands on the tabletop and looked at them. He said, "Spring thaw will start in 6 weeks, maybe 8. She set down the mending. "You said I could take the horse," she said, "when the snow melted." "I did." She waited. He looked up. "That was a true offer. It still is. The horse is yours if you want her. I'll give you enough provisions to get to Harlan if that's where you want to go, or anywhere else." He paused. "I just want you to know," another pause, longer, "that it's also not the only option, if you wanted to stay. That's an option too, a different kind than before." He cleared his throat. "No conditions on it. No debt. I'm not good at talking about things. But I thought I should say it plainly." Verity looked at the fire. She thought about Harlan County. She thought about what was left there, a farm that had been sold, a father who had made a decision she had not been consulted about. She thought about the road between here and anything that had come before, and whether there was anything on it worth walking back toward. She picked up the mending again. "You're right that you're not good at talking about things," she said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "The trousers are nearly done," she said, "and then I was going to start on the harness that needs resewing. If you don't object." "I don't object," he said. "Then I'll finish those tonight," she said, "and in the morning you can show me the rest of the trap line, the sections I haven't seen yet." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. She kept her eyes on the mending. The firelight moved across the rough-hewn wall, and outside the wind was doing its usual thing, pressing against the seams of the cabin as if testing whether they'd hold. They held. "The moment that stays with me, the one I keep turning over, is the question Verity asked on her first night in that cabin, not whether she was safe, not what would happen next. She asked whether he wanted her in the bed now or after he was asleep, and she asked it in the same flat, practical voice someone might use to ask about the weather. That's what broke something open in me when I first heard this story. Not the cruelty that put her in that saloon, the cruelty that had trained her over years to treat her own suffering as a scheduling matter. I've been thinking about what it takes to undo that kind of damage. And I keep coming back to the same answer. It isn't one grand gesture. It's not a speech, not a promise. It's 30 consecutive days of a man who does exactly what he says and nothing he doesn't. It's a pair of wool socks left without comment. It's a book placed on a table with no instruction attached. It's someone who, when she knocks a shelf loose and ruins half his winter coffee, just picks up the broom. Jeb didn't explain himself. He didn't try to convince Verity he was different. He just kept being different, day after day, until she had enough evidence to begin, very cautiously, to believe her own eyes. That's what I think of when people ask what integrity actually looks like in practice. It's not the moment you declare your values. It's the 100th quiet moment when no one is watching and you do the decent thing anyway. Jeb had no audience. There was no one to impress. He washed her feet because they needed washing and he had the materials to do it. He slept on the floor because the bed was hers and he'd said so. The character of a person isn't revealed in the dramatic moments. It accumulates in all the ordinary ones, steady as sediment. And then there's Verity. What she did the afternoon Alcott rode back up that mountain, standing on the porch alone, no one coming to help, measuring the distance between herself and two armed men. That wasn't bravery in the way we usually talk about bravery, as if it's something you're born with or you're not. That was a woman who had spent months quietly rebuilding her own judgment, learning to trust what she observed, and then acting on it when it counted. She didn't freeze. She walked back through the door, picked up the Remington, and stood her ground. That took something that can't be given to you, a kind of inner stubbornness, a refusal to be smaller than the situation demands, that you have to grow yourself through hard use. What Jeb did required decency. What Verity did required something harder, the willingness to believe, after everything, that her own assessment of a situation could be trusted, that she was capable of reading a room and acting on what she read. Years of being told otherwise implicitly and explicitly, and she still got there. There's a cause and an effect in this story that I don't think is accidental. Jeb's consistency made space for Verity's recovery. Verity's recovery made it possible for her to protect them both. One decent choice rippling forward into consequences neither of them could have predicted in that saloon on a Thursday night in November. I don't know that I have a tidy way to wrap that up. I'm not sure it needs one.